Hello and welcome to KellyApy, a self-help podcast. Well, today we're going to be talking about dual diagnosis in addiction. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is dual diagnosis? Well, yeah, it's just what it sounds like. It's someone who's not only battling an addiction, but also a mental illness. Now, I'll tell you what, I've worked with many women who suffer from this, and I can tell you, as hard as it was for me to get sober with just a diagnosis of alcoholism, it is extremely hard for the person who suffers from another mental illness on top of it. So, as in all my podcasts, the experts I bring on, they're not the clinical experts, but instead those who have actually gone through it. Therefore, today I'm going to be talking with my friend Jess. Now, I have watched Jess in her battle to beat this disease, and you know, at one point I actually felt she might lose. However, she found a way out and is a powerhouse in helping other women who suffer from this. Please welcome to the show, Jess. All right, welcome, Jess. I'm so glad you could be with us this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here and for asking me to do this.
Well, I think it's such an important thing to talk about that not a lot of people know about. I didn't know about it when I first got sober, and I've learned through the years this is really something prevalent. So why don't you just kind of explain for those that are not familiar with it, dual diagnosis as you've come to understand it in your experience?
Dual diagnosis, in my experience, was to have or to suffer at the time. You know, I'm not suffering today, but you know, with multiple illnesses, mental illnesses. You know, so for me, that was addiction, alcoholism, bipolar, generalized anxiety, ADD tendencies. You know, I had a whole bag of different mental illnesses that I was dealt.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I did, and looking at the research, I did my little research for this. You had a lot of them. You almost had a full bingo card there, lady.
Yeah, I really did.
They talk about ADHD, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, depression, eating disorders, general anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsiveness, PTSD, and schizophrenia are very common dual diagnosis ways that it can manifest itself.
Yes, I did have the eating disorder as well and the PTSD. So you reminded me.
So there you go.
More. Yeah,
you got your bingo card. Bingo.
Bingo! Yay.
So that's interesting because it's not just necessarily dual diagnosis. It could be multiple diagnoses going on, can it?
Yeah, and I think that's called comorbidity.
Oh, interesting.
I believe multiples. Yes.
Okay, so what came first, the disease or the addiction? What do you think?
I think that when I was younger, there was a foreshadowing of mental illness, especially with the anxiety. You know, I remember being a kid and having extreme anxiety just about walking onto the school bus, raising my hand in class, going to sleep at night, to the point where it felt very unmanageable. But as I got older, you know, around age 11, 12, you know, that's really when my addiction started. So it felt like it was obvious that started first, but really it started before that.
It's interesting with the generalized anxiety disorder, you know, because I can relate to everything you just said there with the really being an anxious kid, not being able to sleep at night. I was afraid of everything. And I remember a few years into my sobriety, I sat there and I was like, and I had some double-digit sobriety at this time, and I'd been around in a 12-step recovery for a while. And all of a sudden, one day I'm sitting in a meeting, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe I just suffered from social anxiety. I think I might just have an anxiety disorder. And then I remembered, oh, no, you know, you also threw up in your purse. You also, once you put alcohol in your body, couldn't stop. No, you're definitely an alcoholic. So, but it's so insidious how little things like even those of us who probably do suffer from general anxiety disorders. It seems to be very prevalent among us alcoholics, that can
Yeah.
be a part of what's going on with us.
Yeah. And I think that, the big difference, I think, how it was described to me is that, with bipolar, especially, everybody has ups and downs. And there's this idea that bipolar is I'm happy and I'm sad. And, to be honest, that's not really what it is at all. I mean, we all have these ups and downs, but for somebody with bipolar, their life is going to be unmanageable, where they will go to extremes. And, the mania is not necessarily happy. The mania is feels like this uncontrollable energy source. It almost kind of feels like I have superpowers and like I can do anything, even if I'm just sitting on the couch. And for depression, it didn't feel like sadness. For me, it felt like nothingness, like numbness. It felt like somebody had turned down the volume and like white noise, like a static, where I felt like I was completely detached from reality.
And that's just it too. It really is a chemical imbalance, isn't it, Jess? It's like,
Oh yeah.
you're not on an even playing field as, say, Joe Schmo alcoholic that just kind of walks in the room because they've got the disease of alcoholism. If you also suffer from like bipolar disorder or some of these other mental illnesses, it's actually really, you're not even on a even playing field there. So what do you do with that?
I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's why I think for me, I had to treat mental illness hand in hand with my recovery, because if I was using, my meds wouldn't work, obviously. And I was self-medicating. Essentially, I was playing doctor. And if I wasn't using, I could not stay sober, which meant to me that I needed a 12-step program, to be able to kind of clear, pave the way for, the meds to even work. I had to be sober for the meds to even actually have a chance.
That's just it too. The medicines, antidepressants, and all the different types of medicines that science has come out with to help mental illness. It's fascinating. There really some really good stuff, but not every person is going to need the same remedies as others. And I think many people who suffer from alcoholism had frowned upon people taking antidepressants and this, that, and the other, but they're not doctors, and they don't know that these people need to have this to get them on an even playing field.
Yeah. And I think that that's usually said by people who don't suffer from mental illness, and I think it's just ignorance, and maybe they do have mental illness, but they're not treating it, one or the other. But in my experience, I could not stay sober without medication. And I know that, good doctors were put on this earth to help us. And, if you look at the brain of somebody who's bipolar and someone who's not, we literally have a chemical imbalance, and that cannot be entirely treated. In my experience, with recovery, I definitely needed medication as well. So, I mean, it could kill somebody. People have died because they were told not to take medicine.
Yep.
I've seen it.
I've seen it. We had a lady who came to our meeting, Susan, and did you know Susan? Were you around with Susan? You remember?
I did, Susan, and I watched that happen.
That was unbelievable. Just to kind of share this story with people out there who don't know. Most people don't know. Right. But Susan would come to. She was alcoholic seeking recovery, but she also suffered from severe depression, I believe. And somehow, some way, she was told, I think, by somebody to not take her. She couldn't take her, if she wanted to be sober, she couldn't take her medicine, her antidepressants, or whatever they had her on. I don't know if somebody told her that or if she made the decision herself, but she stopped, whatever the reason, she stopped taking it because she felt like she couldn't stay sober if she was taking it. And we literally watched this woman turn from this vibrant, beautiful, loving woman who was a hospice nurse and she turned into a zombie. She couldn't even, you would never even recognize her. Remember that, Jess? How
Yeah.
devastating that was, seeing her walk in and just like catatonic almost, there was nothing to her. And you tried to reach her. And when she started taking her meds, it was just too late. And she ended up killing herself, horrifically killing herself. I don't want to go into details, but it wasn't a pretty suicide. And we all went to her funeral. That's the danger of this, right?
Yeah. And, I have to be careful, not to get angry at that kind of situation, but just to look at it from an angle of love and just the fact that there's just a lot of ignorance and stigma, around this. And, it's not necessarily somebody's fault. I really just think that it's ignorance. And I think that that's why it's so important that we bring about awareness, around these illnesses and just kind of, help people to realize that we don't choose this, that this is something that we're born with and it's very serious. And, you said that you watched her turn into a zombie, and that's a whole other thing where sometimes taking medicine can make us worse if we're not properly medicated. And sometimes it can take a while to be properly medicated, I mean, maybe you get it your first go around, but maybe it's a week, a month, a year, years. I mean, it takes what it takes, but it is there for you. The right combination is there for you.
Yeah. And I've seen people kind of struggle with, okay, they start feeling good. They start taking the meds because they realize they need to take meds. They start feeling good. Things are going great. And then they suddenly just decide to play doctor and stop.
I have been there.
You have? Okay. Talk about that.
I definitely, there were periods of my sobriety where, I had been taking my medicine, I was feeling great. And, I thought to myself, I don't want to take pills the rest of my life. I'm good now, and so I would stop taking the medicine and I would go to this really dark place, followed by an episode of mania or depression, or even trying to end my life, so it was very difficult.
And that's the thing. It's not necessarily I guess, the great obsession of every abnormal drinker in alcoholism is to be able to control his drinking or his or her drinking. But also with the dual diagnosis, it's also to not have to take medicine to just get by on a day-to-day basis. So I get that.
Yeah. And, I had to, in step one in recovery, they talk about how we had to concede to our innermost self that we're alcoholic or addict. And I had to do that with my medicine. And I had to concede to my innermost self that I have to take meds the rest of my life, and that was a hard pill to swallow, literally, because, and it's funny because as an addict, I wanted to take pills. And then all of a sudden I'm sober and I'm like, I don't want to take pills. And, but I definitely, through trial and error, through experience, I learned that I have to be medicated for the rest of my life.
How many years you were in and out for quite a few years while you were trying to get this?
Yeah, I've been in recovery for 11 years, but I've been sober consistently for 7 years now.
Yeah. And what was it? What was it that actually did it for you? I mean, because I remember looking at you many times, sitting there looking. It's like, well, how can we get through to Jess? What's going on with Jess? Why can't Jess get this? And I didn't realize you were also dual diagnosis at the time. I did. You had shared about wanting to suicide ideation and stuff like that. But I hope that's okay to talk about. But
yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
What was it that actually did it for you, that was the turning point for you?
Well, I got completely desperate, with every area. I was sick of my addiction. I was sick of my mental illness. And, when it came time when I was willing to do anything, I was seeking, and I shared in meetings, that I have a mental illness and I need help. And, you know, for me, what did it finally was finding the right doctor was a huge part of it, because I had been through so many doctors who really over medicated me. And I was a zombie. And I thought to myself, if this is what it's like to take meds, I'd rather drink or I'd rather drug. And, you know, so for me, a person in the program said, you know what, I'm going to pay if you will show up, you know, I will pay for you to go to one of the best doctors in the Carolinas who specializes in neurology and bipolar and PTSD. You know, he helped me and I think he can really help you. And so I took that opportunity and I showed up, and this doctor was amazing. You know, he broke down mental illness to me in a way that I'd never heard it before. And he said, you know, Jess, you know, you can call it bipolar, you can call it anxiety, ADD, you know, everything. What it is that you have an inability to regulate energy. And he said, in addition to your mood stabilizer, which I absolutely need, what would benefit you the most is to learn how to breathe, is to do yoga. And so, you know, he said, I'll give you anxiety medicine, you know, if that's what you need. But he said, before adding on all of these meds, you know, for anxiety and sleep, you know, what if you tried yoga? What if you tried meditation? And, you know, at some point I did try those things right away. I wasn't really ready to jump into yoga, but at some point I did. And I don't take anxiety medicine today because I do practice meditation and I do practice breathing. And he was right. It helped more than any pill would.
Interesting. Interesting. So some alternative therapy on top of regular therapy really kind of sparked it for you. And then when you started going to the doctor, did you like change your program in 12-step recovery, or were you already kind of feeling like, okay, I'm on a good path on 12-step where I am with my 12-step recovery? Or did that have to change as well? The spiritual solution is what 12-step recovery is based on. So did you feel like that played into this as well?
Yes, and they definitely had to be treated hand in hand. You know, the drink or the drug had to be put down first. You know, so when I came into meetings and I was asking for help, I did get a sponsor and she started to take me through the steps. And I still really, really struggled sober, you know, because I needed to get properly medicated at some point. And for me, that needed to be sooner rather than later. So I took the steps and I started seeing a doctor at the same time. And you know, the steps kind of worked out certain things and the medication worked out certain things. And, you know, what I came to learn, you know, one thing that my doctor said to me that really changed my perspective on medication was he said that you'll know that you're properly medicated when you don't feel medicated. And that was a huge relief because I thought I would have to be a zombie. I thought if I take meds, I'm going to lose who I am, you know.
I hear that from everybody. I hear that from everybody, Jess. So that's important to talk about because I know some people who suffer from depression, and I said, you know, maybe check out, talk. You know, they've come so far with medicines these days from where they used to be, and everybody's just worried that they're going to just not feel. They'll feel numb like you felt, and then like, what's the point? So that's so important to know.
Yeah,
you don't feel numb today. Right?
No. I mean, you know, I'm just like everybody else. I'll have good days and necessary days. You know, I call them where it's just not, you know, I have these little ups and these little downs, but it's the human experience. It's not necessarily my mental illness because it's manageable today, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the difference. It's just manageable today.
So there's somebody who's going to be listening to this thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, this is great. I need to hear this. I need to do this. What would you suggest they do to get help with this if they feel like they suffer from dual diagnosis?
You know, I would definitely suggest, you know, a 12-step program. I would suggest getting a sponsor and taking the steps, and really, treating their addiction, alcoholism, eating disorder, whatever it is, with that. In addition to seeking a good doctor, you don't have to get married to the first doctor that you meet. If you can't get the meds right, if you don't feel good about your doctor, it's okay for you to take charge of your mental illness. And I'm not saying play doctor yourself, not at all.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
saying it's okay to not stick with the first doctor that you go with. I would suggest a good doctor and working with them carefully about, what it is that's going on with you, and having them to work carefully with your medications and not just over medicating you and giving you a medicine for your symptom, but a good doctor will really try to help you to not take a ton of medicine. They'll really try to get to the core issue and go from there. But, I would definitely suggest getting into the 12-step program and also getting connected to a doctor and getting connected to a tribe of people, whether it's like a fellowship or a tribe, but, really holding on to other people, because they'll be able to tell you, Jess, you're looking a little manic lately. Jess, you're, not going to meetings, or, they can kind of help you, because I can get lost in my mind sometimes.
And you had actually, I think at one point you even had a 12-step dual recovery group. Didn't you have that going on at one point?
Yes, we called it Bipolar Bonfire. and yeah, it was awesome. I had a fire pit in my backyard once or twice a month, and we had people with dual diagnosis come and share if you're struggling with your recovery, if you're struggling with mental illness, because if you're struggling with one, the other is going to suffer as well. So it was wonderful. Like, it brought me so much joy, to bring people together and have a place where we can all talk about our other mental illnesses as well.
Yeah, that's got to be important, because you can relate, I'm sure, in a meeting when you hear other alcoholics talk, but you guys have that extra something special that you are dealing with as well, in that you're also battling a mental illness, and that is a monster. So you literally got to put all the cats in the bag at the same time. You feel like you're alone, but you're not alone, because you see there's so many other people out there going through it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, it requires a lot more work, but I think the reward is much greater, rather than if I wasn't properly medicated or I wasn't working a program, if I were just barely hanging on. I mean, I told my husband, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? Because for me, I used to wake up with extreme anxiety, this knot in my chest, this difficult to get out of bed. And, we have to do a lot of work just to be okay. But it's definitely worth it. When we are willing to do the work, it's definitely worth it, because we get to be a part of life. We get to show up, we get to, experience this light and this joy and have friendships and all of these things that we couldn't do, or I couldn't do, if I wasn't sober or medicated.
That's so beautiful. It's seeing where you came from and where you are today is night and day. It really is. And I say that, you have gone from the dark to the light. You are a light. And I've seen you also reach out, and you help so many other women who go through this. You might even help men too, but lots of times we just kind of stick with the women, stick with the women, and the men stick with the men, whatever. But you're helping other people, and just by, I know I know this sitting down for this podcast was hard for you today, but it was such an important thing, and you've done so much to help those people out there suffering, because in my research, I found 8.4 million people suffer from dual diagnosis. They found, and that was in 2012. So it's
Wow.
even more, I'm sure, with COVID now. So this is definitely something that needs to be addressed. So and if you are out there and you're struggling and you can't get this, think about, are you also struggling with a mental illness? is that part of what's going on with you? Because it might not just be plain addiction. It might not just be plain alcoholism. You might just trying to self-medicate something that needs to be looked at by a professional, and they can help you find a way out with your mental health. It has to be two tracks, right?
Yeah, definitely. And, it can also be a little bit tricky because there are a handful of people out there who, suffer from a mental illness, and they'll reach for drugs and alcohol to self-medicate, but they might not necessarily be an alcoholic or an addict. So,
Yeah.
that can get confusing. Those lines can get blurred because sometimes that person, just needs medication, and then it's like it's not even a struggle or a factor, drugs and alcohol. But that's something that we all need to be honest with ourselves about, and we can discover that quickly. If we get medicated and we still discover that we have alcoholism, then obviously that's when we become a dual diagnosis.
That's a good point, because not everybody who has a mental illness is necessarily an addict or an alcoholic. They're just trying to find relief, so that's what they're turning to. But once they start getting the proper medicine and taken care of, then if they still crave alcohol and they start drinking alcohol and can't stop, then they're probably an alcoholic and still need, like you said, dual diagnosis. What a great thing to bring up. Absolutely. And there's rehabs out there too that specialize in this as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I did go to an outpatient program, for drugs and alcohol. And I did go to some meetings called DBSA, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. And, so there are, different programs and different resources, and you can kind of ask people in your 12-step programs, or ask people, in the community, even just Google it, if you need to get into a facility, there are a lot of resources available.
Yeah, you just plug in dual diagnosis and a lot of stuff pops up with facilities and rehabs that kind of specialize in that stuff. And they're trained to kind of deal with both at the same time. So that might be a good option to look at as well. So
Yeah.
you can tackle both at the same time, which you need to do, I guess, to fully recover. So
Yes.
Jess, we've come to the end of our podcast here. I can't believe it. It's time flies. And it's become apparent to me that I have to have you on to talk about further things in future KellyApy episodes.
Great. I would love to.
That'd be awesome. But listen, I like to end each podcast with my guest giving a message of hope to help and heal those out there suffering from dual diagnosis or whatever they're dealing with. So what is your message of hope to help and heal that person out there who really needs to hear something today?
My message of hope would be, no matter how hopeless you feel, no matter how far down you've gone, no matter what you've done, you have a chance to recover and to live a happy life. You don't have to resign to the life of a zombie with medication. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to suffer, from your mental illness and addiction. It's definitely possible for you to have a full life where you're present with your kids, you have meaningful relationships, you can go to work, you can go to the store. It's possible for you to be able to have a life, a good life, a great life, even though you're an addict, alcoholic, or have another mental illness. That help is there, and all you have to do is reach for it.
Awesome. That's a beautiful message, Jess. And I'm going to end with a quote that I found from the rationalhealth.com. And it says, depression is not selfish. Anxiety is not rude. Schizophrenia is not wrong. Mental illness is not self-centered any more than a broken leg or the flu is self-centered. If your mental illness makes you feel guilty, review the definition of illness and treat yourself with the same respect and concern you would show a cancer patient or a person with pneumonia. So,
I love that.
Isn't that great? Because yeah, it is. It's an illness, just like anything else. It's just something that we need to be more tolerant of and understanding of with those suffering from it. Nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing to be ashamed of. So also, real quick before I close out the KellyApy episode, you have a company that you started called Sober Swag. I want to give that a big shout out. If anybody wants to check out Jess's company, it's beautiful. She's wearing this beautiful shirt that says Fellowship of the Spirit right now. So she's got all kinds of great sober swag to check out.
Thank you. Yeah,
How
we're
would they-
called 12-step. I'm sorry, what was that?
Go ahead, Jess.
We're called 12-step swag. And, you can find our apparel and gifts, all recovery related, at 12stepswag.com. And it's just amazing and beautiful. I never would have thought that, my friend and I could start this business together, and to be successful and have a job that we love. I mean, it's just beyond my wildest dreams. It's awesome.
She's using all the gifts and talent she has, and it's beautiful clothing. So check it out. And they've got other things as well, like she said. But we're going to close it out right now. Thank you guys for coming to KellyApy and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm gonna be talking to you on future episodes, lady.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.
And to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning into KellyApy today. So again, we're officially on season 3. If you enjoyed the podcast, subscribe. We're going to do it for a half an hour each week. And if you'd like more positive messages, you can check out our YouTube blog, Monday Messages, hosted by yours truly, Kelly Mahoney. Until next week, have a great week, and we'll see you next week for another edition of KellyApy.